Hello and welcome back to another edition of Chill with Kaiju Kim. I'm Kaiju Kim. Hope you're all doing well on this lovely afternoon, evening, whatever time it is for you. Before we get rolling tonight, I just want to let you know that if you would like me to get rid of this pesky StreamYard branding right here, you can join my Patreon starting tomorrow. My financial situation will not allow me to upgrade my StreamYard account on my own, so I need some help from you guys. You can join for as little as $1 a month, and you'll get access to bonus content, and you will receive a live shout out at the end of each episode of this show. And if you don't want to make a monthly commitment, you can head over to my TeePublic store and buy some merch. Link is down below in the description. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome back onto the show the man of many podcasts, Nathan Marchand.
All right, everyone, chill with Kaiju Kim. I think I made that joke the last time I was on here too, but I couldn't resist.
It's always welcome. It's always welcome. Welcome back onto the show, Nathan. How have you been?
It's been busy, partly because of the reason I'm going to be here tonight. I've been writing for one of my podcasts, editing another podcast, and so I keep myself busy. And then obviously, I have to go do this weird thing called a job on occasion. So
A job? What?
I know, right? So there's a little bit of that I have to take into consideration because in case anyone doesn't know, unlike my persona, my character, so to speak, on the Monster Island Film Vault, I am actually an English adjunct instructor at a local university here in my home city. So I'll be going to teach tomorrow because I teach Monday through Thursday. At least one class. I have one class on a couple of days, and then two classes on two other days. So I keep busy.
Yeah, I can hear that. All right, let's see who we have in the chat so far tonight. We got Sunzilla 2008. How's it going?
Hey there.
Garzilla, yay, thanks for stopping by. Beat Tori in Goji. So many podcasts, so little time.
Yeah. Oh, we got some more people popping in.
We got Doomzilla. How's it going? Doomzilla. Kasaibo F29 and Big Bar. Yay.
Wow. I feel like every time I watch one of your streams, you never have the same people in the chat.
Yeah, I feel like it's a few different people every time, but yeah. I got a couple of regulars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So last time you were on the show, I don't think I asked you my 3 questions to get the ball rolling. So we're just going to ask them tonight. So how did you get into Godzilla? What's your favorite Godzilla film? And what is your favorite non-Godzilla kaiju film?
Oh, kaiju film, specifically non-Godzilla kaiju film. Okay. I've told the story about how I got into Godzilla a few times before. It actually was thanks to a chance trip to visit my grandmother, because I grew up without cable TV. I know, weird, right? But my grandparents had cable TV. So that was one of the fun things about visiting grandma and grandpa, is that I could watch cable TV, and it was kind of exciting. So I went there, and there was, I believe it was WGN, because you gotta remember I live in Indiana, and WGN is, I don't know if it's still around anymore because I don't hear as much about it, but it was a station out of Chicago, and they were included on this cable package. Well, they happened to be doing a special thing on, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, and it was called Oh My Godzilla Weekend. I know, it's the same joke that we've been making for years, but just watch King of the Monsters 2019 and you'll know. And I caught the tail end of Terror of Mechagodzilla, and it caught my attention, and from there I just started looking into it more, and before that I had seen the Trendmasters toys on the shelves, and then I just And I just dove right in and just started tracking down as many as I could. And that is a related answer to your second question, which is sometimes my list of favorite Godzilla movies will shift around a little bit from time to time, but one that is consistently high on my list is Terror of Mechagodzilla. I'm a big fan of it. It's partly because it was my first, but it's also because I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on in that movie. Even the fact that it's kind of a weird melding of what at the time was the new sensibilities of 70s Godzilla films with the old sensibilities of the original creative team like Honda and all the rest of them. That it doesn't always mesh, but it's interesting that they attempted to make it mesh. And also it's noteworthy for being apparently not the first. Although yeah, I still kind of like to think of it as the first, but it was written by a woman, so it's a rare instance where we have a Godzilla film written by a woman, and I think it's actually a very interesting film, perhaps even a better film, given the kind of story that we have in there for being written by a woman. And then as for favorite non-Godzilla kaiju film, again, that kind of shifts around a little bit, but right now I'd probably say Pacific Rim. I adore Pacific Rim so much. It was one of the best theater-going experiences that I've had in my life, and it's one of the, how people talk about how they wish that there could be movies that they could quote unquote wipe from their memory so they could experience for the first time all over again. I would love to do that with the first Pacific Rim because it was so very delightful to go to the theater and see that.
Yeah, that would have been cool for me to see in theater. I didn't see Pacific Rim until later on, until a couple years ago, actually. I think it was during quarantine that I finally sat down and watched it. It's actually really good.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my loss. And he must loathe Pacific Rim Uprising.
I do. I do loathe the Uprising. Oh God, don't get me started. Uprising was one of the rare instances where I walked out of a movie theater angry. I'm usually pretty good about selecting movies that I will at the very least enjoy ironically. Very rarely do I walk out of a theater angry. That was one of them.
Do not mention Uprising around Nathan.
I don't know if that's Michael or Travis, but they both know.
They both know. We
both know. Bringing up Uprising is asking for trouble.
Yep. Oh boy. All right. Yeah. I think you've talked about your hate for that movie on one of your many podcasts. And speaking of your podcasts, let's get right into our main topic for the evening. So I don't know if I know this story or not, but humor me. What got you into podcasting?
Oh man, it's a little bit of a story. So it's a good thing you're asking this early because, and I will try to abridge it as much as I can. I first became aware of podcasting feels like a long time ago now, which because it was a little more than a decade ago. I had heard about them, but I never really listened to them until I had a couple of friends, Nick and Tim, who've been on the Film Vault a couple of times. They up and decided to start their own podcast. And it was also around the time that I got my first book published because besides podcasting, I'm also a writer. And they had me on their podcast to interview me for my first book. So, that was my first taste of the podcasting experience. And I would listen to their show. And then I started looking into finding other shows and I would listen to them. I appeared several more times. And the show in question, my friend Nick and Tim show, is Derailed Trains of Thought. You should listen to it. It's excellent. And so they brought me on a couple more times. And then they did a big milestone episode in, when was this? I think 2016, somewhere around there. And they brought me on to participate in that. And one of their other regular guests was there recording. And he would come on and he would talk about classic movies. Well, interestingly, he decided to come on and talk about, unbeknownst to me, talk about a Godzilla film.
Ooh.
It was specifically GMK. So they surprised me a little bit and had me come on, and we both chatted about GMK for a little while. And at the end of it, I think it was Tim said, you guys should, I think he kind of half jokingly said, you guys should start your own podcast. Well, a few months later, he got a hold of me and said, hey, you want to make the podcast happen? And I said, well, that would be interesting. I've never done this podcast thing. I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I was friends with a lot of podcasters that appeared on their shows as a guest, but I'd never had run my own podcast. So we did a bunch of work. We had, they had weekly meetings and things like that and put everything together. And then a year later, we launched the show, and it was Godzilla centric, obviously. And we did that for a while, but things happened, and we ended up we had creative differences among other things. It was a whole to do. We ended up parting ways, and then I went and started grad school. So that took up my time for a little while, and this is just such a fun part of the story that I really have to tell. But but doing that first podcast, I really got bit by the bug. And I'm like, I want to do this again. I have spent too much time and money getting resources. I'm a collector of physical media. I love having real books, and I love having Blu-rays, DVDs, CDs, all that fun stuff. I like having those, and I invested a lot in them. And I'm like, I don't want to waste it. So I'm going to look into doing this podcast thing again. And so I wish I was able to use my regular setup. You might notice that I have an audience that I have a different setup. It's because my internet's being weird, and I had to plug my laptop into the Ethernet, which is not in my master bedroom. So I'm out in the living room right now. Although if you pay close enough attention, these are pictures of all the celebrities that I've met, including a few from G-Fest. So, the eagle-eyed viewer might be able to spot some of them. But anyway, I always say that because I would have normally used my podcast setup, and I could have shown off my microphone. And so I still have my microphone from that first show. So I went to a music and audio store that here in my home city, it's called Sweetwater Sound. And they're one of the biggest businesses in the city. And they are known not only around the country, but around the world. So I walked, and that's where I got my microphone. So I went in there, had my microphone with me, and I thought I would just need some sort of an accessory to plug the microphone into my laptop and just record directly into Audacity. So I walk in there and I said, what can you give me that I could use to connect this microphone to my laptop? And this guy says, oh, I'm going to take you and introduce you to this guy. I'm like, oh boy. And then he takes me over, and here's this very energetic black guy who's working the sales floor, and he's like, oh, and I said, okay, so I need to to do this. He's like, oh, I got something to show you, and it takes me over, and he shows me. I wish I could show. I had it to show you, but he shows me this thing called the Rodecaster Pro. It's this soundboard designed for podcasters by podcasters, basically. And it was a new product at the time. This is 2019. Okay. And so he gives me the whole spiel. He shows me videos about the whole thing and how it works. And I am geeking out, Kim. I am geeking out in this store. And I never would have expected it because this is the place that my sister would hang out in, because she's a musician and a singer. This is where she hangs out and she geeks out. Here I am geeking out in this place. And then I saw the sticker. Saw how much it would cost. And I'm like, oh man, this is so cool, but I don't have this much money on me right now. I'm a poor college student again, and which you know about because you went back to school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he says, oh, but wait, there's more. And I'm like, there's more? What? And he said, we're doing a thing right now where you can get it on a payment plan. And it was like, I don't know, like $12-15 a month. I'm like, I'm like, this is too good to be true. This is too good to be. It's spring break. You understand? This is spring break at this point for school. So I'm looking into all of this while I have some time off. And so like, okay, I want to make the decision now, but I know I shouldn't. So I'm going to hold off. Give me a couple days, guys. This is a big deal because I knew because before this I was just toying with the idea of starting a new podcast. I knew if I got this soundboard, there was no going back. This is too big of an investment. If I get this thing, the podcast is happening. It's just happening. So I thought about it for a couple of days. I even talked to one of the professors who was my boss, because I also worked at the university. I was a graduate teaching assistant there. That's how I helped. That got me through school, helped pay for it. And so I went and talked to her about it. And I was just like, you might think I'm weird for saying this, but I was just like, I feel like God is telling me to start this podcast because I have this sitting right here in front of me. And she's like, you know what? You might be right. So I went back to Sweetwater and I took the plunge. I bought the thing and I'm like, all right, time to pick a release date. When am I launching this show? And I decided to launch it in September of 2019. And I got some friends together. I recorded the first episode. It was the Monster Island Film Vault. I recorded the first episode solo, got a handful of some of my best friends together, and we watched the original King Kong 1933 and launched the show with that as the first big episode, because I went through at the time all the Godzilla films on the previous show. So I'm like, you know what? I have to start with something big. You know, next to Godzilla, who's the biggest monster of them all? Kong.
Oh, that's a fantastic story. And hello to Michael Hamilton, one of your many co-hosts, which we'll get to later.
Oh yeah, so I saw that because Travis is running Kaiju Weekly, so Michael is here on his own.
Yes. All right. So the Monster Island Film Vault has been around for about a couple years now already.
Now,
yeah, wow.
2.5 years. It's weird for me to think about that.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah, I know.
So for the people playing at home who may not be familiar, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Monster Island Film Vault?
Do I have to go into the spiel? Like, I got to slip into character for a second? Yeah. So,
you do what you got to do.
Hello, Kaiju lovers, and welcome to the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu.
When I first heard that, heard of the Monster Island Film Vault and I heard that intro, I'm like, whoa, this guy has a lot of energy.
Well, there's a funny story behind that. It's a little bit like there was a similar thing in my previous show. I like to call it my previous podcast life. So we did something similar in there, but I decided to take it a step further in this one because when I was in college, when I was an undergrad, I actually interned for a summer at a radio station. So I got to see firsthand what being, like a DJ and a radio talk show host was like. And so that was very educational and fun for me. And I'm one of those weirdos who still actually likes to listen to the radio when he's in his car. I don't always, I have to listen to podcasts and other things too, but I'll still listen to the local radio just for fun now and then. And so that was fun. And I don't know, have you ever seen the movie, has Robin Williams in it, the movie Good Morning Vietnam?
I have not seen it, but I know what you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah. So that was the title is how Robin Williams' character, because it takes place during the Vietnam War, and he is this guy. I think, if I remember correctly, I think he's civilian, but he's running a radio station at a military base in Vietnam, and so he would always open his morning show as with "Good Morning Vietnam," and then he would go do all kinds of crazy shenanigans to entertain all the soldiers who were there. And the shtick of the movie is that he's doing all of this and it's giving them some much needed relief from the horrors of war. So I decided to tap into that a little bit. So that's where that came from. Hello, kaiju lovers. Go into that.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard that for the first time, it was like early in the morning. I'm like, it's too early for this. No. Wow. Okay.
Woke you right up, huh?
Yeah. Oh, goodness. So I've obviously listened to your show quite a bit, and I've actually been on a couple of episodes.
Yes.
Myself, so yeah.
Yes. And in more ways than one, actually. So you came on for Gamera 3 last fall, actually, because I needed a last minute sub, and I put a word out. I was like, hey, I need someone to come on and talk about Gamera 3 with me. You volunteered. And I'm like, okay, you get to come on the show. And so, well, we had a good time because last year, so I did Kong in season 1. The last year with season 2, I did all the Gamera movies. So I had you on for Gamera 3, and I was really excited about that because, for one thing, you were coming on the show for the first time, and then also I absolutely just love Gamera 3. So I was very excited to finally talk about that one. And then I just had you on a few weeks ago to talk about a very nostalgic kaiju film for you.
Yes, Rodan, 1956.
Yes. And you upped your game on that. I can't begin. I know you're kind of harsh on yourself for the Gamera 3 episode, but my goodness, did you up your game in Rodan? It was so good. That recording was a lot of fun. And I don't know if I've told you this, Kim, but I've been looking at the analytics for that episode. It is at this point one of my most popular episodes.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know what lightning we caught with that episode, but we caught lightning in that. That has been one of the most popular episodes I've had.
That's awesome. Maybe I'm just that fantastic.
Of course you are, Kim.
Oh, Michael's got a question for me. Which show do you like guesting on more, Kaiju Weekly or IMFE? Listen, don't make me choose.
Don't back Kim into a corner like that, okay? There's no good answer.
Listen, Michael. Shut up.
Look at Travis. Look at Travis trying to play Den Mother over here. Look at this. Yeah.
And don't start a fight, Michael. Michael. I'm always trying to start something.
That's why he gets canceled every other week, right? Or every other day at this point. Yeah.
Yep, every day. This is your daily cancellation, Michael. Thank you. I will not dignify this question with a response. Good sir.
Or is she like, which one do you like guesting on more, Kaiju Weekly or MIFE? Yes.
Yes, exactly. That's my answer. Yes.
I mean, the funny thing is that, and I've joked with Michael and Travis about this. Actually, I owe a little bit to Michael and Travis because they were the first people in the Kaiju podcasting community to have me on as a guest. So that was a big step into, to quote a certain famous Kenobi, you have taken your first step into a larger world. And so doing that, I was able to start engaging even more so with the larger Kaiju podcasting community. Because before that, I was just messaging people back and forth and things like that. When I had guests on, I was just asking friends of mine to come on. But then here's Michael and Travis, and they asked me to come on their show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to be on someone else's podcast. It was really exciting. I hit it off with both of them just swimmingly, and they played along with we'll talk about this a little bit. They played along with the kayfabe, to use the pro wrestling term, with the film vault, and quite well actually. And then Travis had such a good time that. Yeah, because I forget what was it. We somehow in the episode got onto the subject of Night of the Lepus and how, or somebody brought up Night of the Lepus, and it's like, oh yeah, that DeForest Kelley from Star Trek was in that, and I absolutely adore Star Trek. I've adored Star Trek since I was a child. And he's like, what? Star Trek? And then we started talking about Star Trek, and and then the next thing I know, I think the next month, Michael took a week off, and I was on to talk about Night of the Lepus,
Yeah.
a kaiju movie with DeForest Kelley about giant killer rabbits.
That is awesome. Nice. So going back to IMFV for a little bit, listening to a few episodes, it kind of doubles as an audio drama, if I'm not mistaken. So what brought that on? Like, you just wanted to try something new, make it.
It's one of those things where in my experience, sometimes I come up with what I think is a really cool idea and I run with it, and then it gets too big for its britches. And that was the case here. My initial thought was to come up with kind of a funny gimmick, make the show stand out a little bit. when I was in my initial planning phases for it. I really love the title Monster Island Film Vault. So I'm just like, I want to go with that. And because, it's got the, noteworthy location, and it says very directly, this is about movies and things like that. So I thought, well, why don't I started thinking about it. It's like, remember when you did you were at the radio station? Why don't you do something why don't you say like, oh, you're at a radio station? That's where the podcast is coming from. It's coming from a radio station. I'm like, oh, okay. How about I put the radio station on Monster Island? So like, think Destroy All Monsters. And then I started going a little bit there. I started doing, because I'm a creative writer as well. And I started doing a little bit of world building on top of that, where I'm like, okay, maybe it's on Monster Island. And at this point, Monster Island is not just a scientific facility. Maybe it's like Jurassic Park. It's got a resort or something there, and the radio station's part of the resort and things like that. And I thought, oh, you know what I should do? Kind of like on all the radio shows, or like Frasier with Roz, I think was her name. On Frasier, like Roz, had the on mic producer who would banter with the host and things like that. I was like, oh, I should do something like that. But who do I have? Well, maybe I should make it a movie character. All right. And then that's where Jimmy comes in. So that's where Jimmy came in, because Jimmy is actually a character from a Toho movie. So he's a legacy character, and he wouldn't be the only legacy character to show up in this. So he's from The War in Space, which is a little known Toho movie. It was Toho trying to make Star Wars, basically, and he was the token white guy in it. And spoiler warning, it looks like he dies by the end, but I said, you know what? No, he didn't. Because when I watched War in Space, I was weirdly attached to Jimmy, and I literally shook my fist at the ceiling when he died. It's like, no! And so I decided, okay, he's on the show now, and he miraculously survived. We don't know how, which can be a running joke, and and he's my producer on the show. So that's where that came about. And so it was meant to just emulate a radio show with this kind of funny setup that I could, that was meant to just be fodder to make some jokes. That was really all it was meant to be. But then people would come on, and they started playing along with it so much that it just kept getting bigger. Like I had a throwaway line in the first episode about the quote unquote board, the board of directors, and it was just supposed to be this one-off thing, and then they kept coming back, and then they turned into villains, and and then there was more stuff with Jimmy, and then all of the Jimmy lore kept expanding. And then I had my guests were coming on, and I didn't tell them to do it. They just started doing this weird thing where they're like, let me tell you this funny, crazy story about how I got to the island today. And they would start doing that. That kept expanding on it. And then it kept getting to the point where it wasn't just funny stories about how I got to the island. It was like whole subplots that started showing up in the show with my guests. The moment I would say where that turn came about, where I'm like, okay, I have to basically make this into a, partly an audio drama now, was my friend Bex from Redeemed Otaku, which is an anime podcast. I had her on. Oh my frick, it's my bosses. It's my fictional bosses. They're following me everywhere.
Should I be concerned? Are we in danger?
Possibly, although right now in the show they don't have as much power as they used to. Now right. They just do the daily management of things. So, but we have a new guy in charge. But anyway,
Dr. Dora spinoff.
That's a whole story unto itself too. I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, Danny. So yeah, hi Danny. So anyway, when she came on, I had her on for 3 months in a row because they do 2 episodes a month, and I had her on to talk about the Mothra Trilogy because, much like you, Kim, one of her favorite things in the world is Sailor Moon. She loves magical girl anime, so I was like, you have to watch these goofy Mothra movies with me because magical girls. So she decided, because I kind of joked in the first episode that since I was basically doing this long run of unrelated movies because I ran out of Kong movies and GVK got delayed again. So I'm like, well, you're mucking up my podcast schedule, dang it. So I was just doing these as a quote unquote filler. And she's like, I'm filler. So she just decided, okay, if I'm filler, I'm going to make it relevant. So she did this whole thing where her, like this character version of herself goes through this weird character arc where she converted to quote unquote Mothrianity and then saw the error of her ways. And there was like when she came for the third episode, she got, unbeknownst to her, because of weird magic Mothra things, she ended up shrinking, and then on her way here, when she was shrunk, she came to a weird island that had crystals, and then Jimmy and Nate were able to finagle some things around to get her restored to her proper size, and then we came up with this bit where we decided that there would be a teleporter that we don't like to use because we don't trust the teleporter, and then we were going to send her back home with this teleporter, but there's a malfunction with it, and it ends up making a magical girl clone of Nate's. So that was the moment when all of those shenanigans went down. I'm like, this is officially expanded, because then that character came back on Bex's show, Redeemed Otaku, and then came back to Monster Island and has been a regular ever since. And then I started having fans who would invent characters either by talking to me, or they would create characters on Twitter, and then they would find their ways onto the show, which is where Danny comes in, because we came up with, I did an episode on Matango. And so he and I were talking one day about Brad Dourif, and I said, like, the Matango are on the island, but they're kept in the basement so nobody can see them, because you don't trust the Matango, because the Matango are nasty things. And so he was like, oh yeah, and I've just imagined, like, there's like one scientist who goes down there into the basement. He's some weirdo, and he's like, he goes up to like this big plexiglass cage, and he like poke the glass like Brad Dourif does in Alien Resurrection, and kind of pester the Matango a little bit. And then he started doing funny voices, and then we ended up creating this weirdo scientist character named Dr. Dourif, after Brad Dourif.
I think he might actually be my favorite character.
Yeah. You heard it here, Danny. Dr. Dourif, her favorite character. And so I just like, we need to have him on the show. We need to have him just like call in and just be like, let me tell you some things about the Matango, my children.
My children.
And it just, the character just took on a life of its own, because people were like, what is going on? They were not expecting this.
Oh, it's hilarious. Danny, next time you're on the show as Dr. Dourif, please try to squeeze in for the children. For the children.
Yeah, but then, like I said, I had started having more people like Raymond Martin and Gary. Those characters, I had no plans for those characters to show up. But then I had a fan named Damon Noyes who just loved the show so much, because he's a mailman by day and an actor by night, and he loves role playing and things. He plays D&D and things like that all the time. He created Raymond Martin, this lawyer character, on Twitter. He just popped up one day. I'm like, what is going on? And then I got a hold of him, and initially I was just saying, I was like, okay, he's a crazy fan. He loves the show. He's playing along. I'm just going to say, hey, welcome to the family, and stuff like that. And then he's like, hi, I'm David. And I'm like, David, I knew it. And then I started talking with, like, how about I get Raymond on the show? And then I wrote this whole, this character was not supposed to be in at all. this was about this time last year when I found this out, and I wrote him into the show, and he's been a staple ever since. And it was because it was a fan who did it. That's the thing that I love about this, is that I feel like I've created a sandbox, and then I have people, fans, other podcasters. Michael has created some characters who have appeared on the show. In fact, he created another one that is going to be appearing in the next episode. And so they keep creating these characters and expanding the cast, expanding this funny little universe that I have been creating, and it's kept my creative writer juices flowing. It's made me try to come up with interesting storylines and things like that, because I put as much effort to thinking of, okay, what kind of an entertaining plot line can I put into these things, and not just whatever is the theme of the season for the podcast, to keep things lively. So there's a new one going on right now, and the big thing that I did, and let me tell you, it was making the episode was a chore. It was very challenging. I've never done something like this before, but I had all of these pieces that had kind of been set up since episode 1. Then they all paid off in episode 50, which was basically the show's second anniversary. That ends up being an MST 3K style riff track for the war in space. And so there was a bunch of characters who showed up. I had a bunch of friends who were guests who came back and made cameos as members of the board, because you found out who the board were finally. And and then the bulk of the episode was we recorded a riff track commentary that you play with the war in space, and you could hear us cracking jokes at the movie, and it was wonderful.
That is awesome. That's a lot of work goes into that. That's insane.
Yeah, trust me. It's very intense, let me tell you. And but then the other thing that's been great is I've been able to meet wonderful people like you and a few other YouTubers, Matt Burkett, Ryan Collins, the Omni Viewer. I even got to do an episode with Brandon Jacobs from Up From the Depths. And so meeting all of these really cool people and getting involved with them in the community, it's been great. And then also because of that, I had a couple of my friends that this is a good way to try, I think, to transition into the other shows, because I'm sure Michael is going to be harassing us until we do it, which is I've had a couple of friends who came to me and said, I want to start a spinoff podcast. Will you be my co-host? And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yes. They don't even have to finish the sentence. I want to start a podcast. Yes.
Yeah, basically. So the first one was Travis Alexander of Kaiju Weekly, the biggest Kamen Rider fan I know.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, and he had told me that he had been thinking about doing a spinoff podcast, but he thought it would be solo. And it was going to be called Henshin. And if he was going to make it about Henshin heroes, and he was really going to dive into Kamen Rider, especially because he wanted more people to know about Kamen Rider and to check out Kamen Rider and things like that. So he sent me the script that he had written for that first episode. And I said, hey, actually, this sounds pretty good. But he then came back to me. He's like, you know what? I need a co-host. You want to be my co-host? And I'm like, okay, let me think about this for a second, because that's a big commitment. And so we talked about it a little bit, and we figured out how to make it work. And I said, okay, let's do this. And then we did some planning. The show went from being Henshin to Henshin Men. We came up with a format and some funny things to go along with that. If you love puns,
I love puns. That's the best.
That Henshin Men is full of puns. In fact, our sign off is a Henshin pun every episode. And then we launched that last summer, and with that one, I'm trying to remember. Our tagline is a podcast about the appreciation of Japanese superheroes and their high-flying and high-kicking adventures. So it's a TV podcast. We watched 2 episodes of a tokusatsu television show, and we launched with the original Kamen Rider. And so we're going through that 2 episodes at a time. And we just, it's just 2 guys just talking about the show and cracking some jokes, riffing on it a little bit, talking about how much we've enjoyed it. Travis is the Kamen Rider super fan. I'm coming into this fresh, having hardly seen any Kamen Rider. And so that created a very interesting dynamic there. And so we've been going pretty strong since then. Now, we've had a few lulls where Travis has had to take some time off. So then I took over the show and brought on some guests, talked about some other Henshin hero stuff. So I've talked with people about Ultraman Zero. I did an anime episode with Ryan Collins called Shinesman. And then last month, I had a few other people on we had someone on to talk about Super Inframan, which some people might say, that's Chinese. I'm like, it wouldn't exist without the Japanese heroes, and it had Japanese crew. It counts. And the Henshins, it counts. So I did that. Hokkaido. I reposted a Kaiju Weekly episode that I was on that talked about the Birth of Ultraman stage show. So that one's been a lot of fun. That one is a little bit more. It's a little bit less intense in terms of, because I know we're going to talk about the research that I do. That one's a little bit less intensive on the research, and it's more just about appreciating the shows. We get into some more substantial topics related to culture and all that. And if I come across something in whatever it is that we're looking at, that I'm like, what is going on with this? And then I'll look it up to get some clarification on it. But it's much less research intensive. But like I said, if you love puns, you'll enjoy this one. I highly recommend. There's several episodes that I really highly recommend to people. One of my favorite ones, and I'm sure Travis will agree with me on this, I can't remember the episode number off the top of my head, but it had, and I hope I'm saying this, the Kaijin of the week's name right, but it had Musasabito, a flying squirrel monster. I'm not kidding. A flying squirrel monster. It was insane. He looked nuts. He did crazy things. Musasabito! Yeah. But the part that killed me the most about Musasabito is when he flies. He doesn't glide. He like flies, and the way I described it in the episode is that I said he sounded like a jet powered by flatulence, because it's like. You have to see the episode to believe it. It is so incredibly crazy. Oh. It wrecked us so hard. Like that was the second episode we talked about in that episode. First one I was like, yeah, okay, it's kind of standard. Yeah, okay. Kamen Rider, find the monster, blah blah blah.
Like Danny, Kamen Rider has never been known.
No, it hasn't. It's like, oh, this is kind of average, whatever. Yeah. Then we're like, okay, Musasabito, this is nuts. Like the energy level just like just skyrocketed when we got to Musasabito.
Wait, did you just say that the flying squirrel monster was... There goes the puns. Now I really wish I had my podcast set up, because I would have been hitting the button for the rim shot right there. But stupid internet. There we go. We did it.
Stupid internet.
Stupid interwebs.
I don't understand why my Wi-Fi is being so. I don't know if it's the laptop or my internet service or whatever it is, but it's substantially less cool.
Tell your internet to stop hating, otherwise it's going to be canceled.
Oh, yeah. I'll say, like, because Kaiju Kim said so. You don't want to argue with Kaiju Kim.
Excuse me, I'm the queen.
Yes. Danny actually told me when he listened to that episode, he's like, I can't believe Kim did that. It's like, she's cutting loose. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Getting a little too confident for my own good.
You surprised me that episode. I'm just like, really? What? Because that's the fun thing. There's a little bit of improvisation. I took classes on improvisational comedy, and one of the things that they talk about is giving the other performers, they call them gifts. So it's like you hand them. So it's like you set up the joke, but you don't give the punchline. And then they can either take the gift and do the punchline, or they can continue the setup for the joke and give it back to you. And then you could do the punchline. So I've gotten into the habit of doing that with the guests. So I threw you something, and then you went directions with it. I'm like, oh, oh my. I was not expecting that. But yeah. So Henshin Men, it's tremendous fun. Just absolutely tremendous fun. And so if you're into, like I said, if you're into tokusatsu television, that's a good place to go, because the Film Vault is more focused on movies. I've done some TV on there. In fact, I'll be doing some more TV on there, thanks to Michael, which is another good segue, because Michael is one of my patrons, and he has requested that, and I believe it'll be next month, if I remember correctly. Next month, he's going to come on the show as a patron and talk about Green with Evil, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers miniseries that introduced the world to Tommy Oliver, the Green Ranger. And that also came about because Michael decided to start another spinoff. He had another spinoff before this that was kind of doing what you're doing now with Chill with Kaiju Kim. But he was interviewing people, having conversations. He had me on that show as well, Danny, Travis. He had a bunch of us on there. And now he decided that with you filling the void for that, because he went on hiatus with that, and now you're filling that void. He's like, okay, I can move on to something else. Well, he's one of the co-creators of Kaiju Ramen magazine, and he wanted to write about Power Rangers because he's been on this kind of journey of rediscovery with the Power Rangers franchise. So he wanted to do an article series, and Michael, having also caught the podcasting bug, he's got a whole story about how he got into podcasting. I'm sure he shared that on your show before. And so he's like, I want to do a podcast to go along with this. And yes, Travis, I saw that you said in the chat that you had a list of people, and I was just one of them, and the other one said no, and then you talked to me. Well, the same thing happened with Michael. He had a list. He went down the list. People said no. I was the first one to say yes. So then we had the Power Trip, which I have to take credit for the name, I have to say, which I was actually just using that when I was talking with him over the phone, and just calling his goal in 2020 was to watch all of Power Rangers, because it was still all on Netflix at the time. And then The Purge happened. But and so his goal was to go through all of it. I call it his Power Trip. And so the name stuck. It became the name of the article series that he's doing. And then he decided to make that also the title of the companion podcast to go along with it. And we just started that last month. And it's unique among Power Ranger podcasts from what I've been able to tell, because most of those shows go through them, an episode at a time, a couple episodes at a time, or something like that. We're doing it by seasons. So we're going to go through each season of the show and talk about it in broad strokes, and talk about it as a unit, and talk about how everything comes together thematically, or doesn't. Hello, Turbo. And and talk about the characters and how they're used, how they progress, and the Zords, the villains, and all of these things, how they work as a unit. And because that's how he's doing the article series. And one of the mainstays that we try to do with that is find a connective theme for the episode. And we start to see that there's a little bit more going on to this than what a lot of people might think. It's not just disposable entertainment. And I've been saying for a while, it's like, good writing is good writing. It doesn't matter if it's for something that's campy. If it's campy, even if it's campy, I should say, if it wants to have a staying power, it still needs to have good writing in order to do that. And so we get into some stuff like that, and it gives me a little bit of an opportunity to flex my English major muscles, a bit on there. And Michael likes to joke that we stole a lot of the format from Henshin, and then quote unquote did it better. It's become a little bit of a running joke. I just say, you know what, Travis, you're not really stealing from me because I'm on both shows, but you and Travis can sort this out in private, okay? If you want to rip off Travis, and the two of you can figure that out. So, So, oh my gosh, yeah. So that's been this new show, and that's been an interesting experience. We've been getting a lot of positive feedback from people that they really love the rapport that Michael and I have on that show, the back and forth. Again, it's similar to Henshin Men, at least when in the initial Kamen Rider era of the show, where Michael is very much the super fan, and I am either kind of rediscovering it after being away from it a heck of a lot longer than he has, or seeing stuff that I hadn't really seen before, or I'd only gotten little bits of it and kind of falling in love with it. I actually kind of blame him a little bit for getting me interested in this. Again, it goes back to the Film Vault, because I was trying to come up with a character that I wanted to have on the Film Vault. Lots of spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't listened to the Film Vault, but I wanted to have a character on the show who would be the head of public relations on the island. And so, but I said I wanted to be a legacy character. So I wanted to be someone who might be loyal to the villainous board, but maybe not all the way necessarily. I like, I was trying to figure out who should that be. You got any ideas for me? I mean, you've been going through Power Rangers again. Is there anybody from Power Rangers that I could borrow, as a legacy character? And he tells me, how about Astronema? I'm like, oh, I kind of remember her. I think I'll go with that. That kind of makes sense. Well, I should probably watch the show so I can, so I can write her correctly. And then I got sucked right back in watching Power Rangers in space. And I'm like, I take occasion to was like, I blame you, because now I'm basically a raging Astronema fanboy now. It's ridiculous. Like, I have the action figure. I'm like, as there was a Lightning Collection 2-pack that had her and Andros, and I actually started looking. I was like, I'm going to end up buying this, aren't I? I'm going to end up buying this, aren't I? Curse you, Michael!
Dang it, Michael!
Dang it, Michael! So then I ended up pulling the trigger on it. But then I got him back, because I bought it, and he's like, I don't need anything new to collect. But I'm like, these figures are really nice. I think we can get more of these Lightning Collection figures. And now he's got a small legion of his own.
Oh my.
Of Lightning Collection figures. Like, gotcha back.
Oh man, that is fun. So why don't you give us a little teaser about your thoughts on Turbo?
Oh God. Do you want the show or the movie?
Both.
Both. I don't want to get into it too much, or else this will be a 5-hour stream. And I want to save it a bit for the podcast, because we do have an episode of Turbo coming up. We have recorded it already, and
your facial expression just says everything that you everything.
The movie, the show is a little bit better. The movie, everything is wrong with the movie.
Everything is wrong with that.
Everything. The only thing that is decent in the movie, and Michael's probably going to start yelling at the screen. He's going to start blowing up the chat. I guarantee he's going to blow up the chat. And the only thing that I can really stomach in Turbo is, Jason David Frank continues to be cool. And I did like the original set of Rangers. They're fine. Jason David Frank continues to be fine. And I do appreciate the special effects. The special effects hold, weirdly enough, I actually would say the special effects in Turbo hold up better than the Mighty Morphin movie, because the Mighty Morphin movie has the ugliest 90s CGI you've ever seen.
Now it's nasty looking.
Yeah, it looks terrible. Now, the practical effects in the Mighty Morphin movie still hold up, but the CGI is awful. But so I can give it that. Everything else is wrong.
Everything else is wrong.
Everything else is wrong, but he wants to be nice to it because Booba talks. You put, I forget, it's like Shepherd Turner, Hillary Shepherd Turner. You put Hillary Shepherd Turner in a corset, and Travis Michael will just like anything.
Oh boy.
I'm like, dude, no, she's a huge downgrade from what we had before. I can't stand this character. And then the funny thing is then I started watching the show and I'm like, oh God, they recast her. And this actress is even more annoying. And then they switched back to the movie actress because she took maternity leave. So you say.
So you say. Seems a little just there. I don't know.
But anyway, and like she's even more annoying. And then they switched back because she was on maternity leave, and she came back kind of like, okay, you can play this character better. I still don't like this character, but you can at least play the character better. And then I will admit the back half of Turbo starts to get marginally better, but you can only polish the turd so much. And and then it didn't help that less than halfway through the show, most of the cast leaves. And don't get me started on Power Kenny. I have nothing against Blake Foster. I said this on the episodes. Like, don't do to Blake Foster what the Star Wars fandom did to Jake Lloyd. Don't ruin his life because you didn't like this kid character. And it seems like Blake Foster has been nothing but a friend to the franchise. He's been very positive about his time on the show and everything like that. I was like, okay, that's fine. It's totally fine. I'm still not a big fan of Turbo or those characters, but it's fine that you had a good time. I'm glad you have a good attitude about it. But, the bright spot that I can say about that is that if we didn't have Turbo, we wouldn't have gotten In Space, and In Space is glorious. So...
Yep, I agree. I agree with that. I was gonna remind you, don't. I know you hate Turbo, but it does lead up to your favorite season.
Well, yes, and I'm gonna. This is my prediction for the rest of our little journey through, because that's the subtitle for the Power Trip, is a journey through the Power Rangers franchise. I'm expecting that Turbo, weirdly enough, I don't think will end up being my least favorite season. I do think that there's two that might be in the running to actually land lower, because like I said, the back half of Turbo does get marginally better. And I do think there are two seasons, from what I understand, that people also don't like, and like they might be in the running. One in particular I have sampled a little bit, and I'm like, good grief, if this is what the whole show is like, congratulations, you figured out how to be worse than Turbo.
I wonder what seasons you're referring to. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
The one that I've heard people talk about, but it's more because people don't like it more because it's bland and it's boring. And I've also heard that it's got a bit of a self-loathing problem because it apparently doesn't even like its own characters. And that's Operation Overdrive.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not a good one.
But the one that I'm dreading the most, because I've sampled a bit of it, Megaforce.
Really? I haven't seen Megaforce. Should I avoid it?
It's painful.
Yeah.
It was painful. I watched Legendary Battle.
Oh.
And it about broke me. And I'm just like, if this is what the whole show is like, ow.
Yikes.
The only thing that was propping up Legendary Battle was all the legacy characters who were showing up because it was a big anniversary special. But don't get me started on how poorly written that whole thing was. Like I said, everything was wrong with Turbo. Legendary Battle figured out, looked at Turbo and said, everything is wrong with Turbo. How can we be worse?
Oh my God. Oh boy. All right. So we're coming up on an hour, but we'll keep talking. We haven't even gotten to your crazy habit of going down research rabbit holes yet.
Yeah.
So, how do you come up with toku topics? Did it just kind of come to your head and then you just run with the idea, or
to let everybody know, when she says toku topics, one of the things that I do on the Film Vault is on the major kind of tentpole episodes. Because like I said, I do 2 episodes a month. And one is a tentpole episode that goes with the season theme. So the season runs for a year. So, for example, last year, 2021, it was the year of Gamera. Because I realized there are 12 Gamera movies and there are 12 months in a year. It's perfect. So, so I went through with that. And then I will do... kind of, I guess you could say, secondary episodes, filler episodes, whatever you want to call it, that will either be running as part of a sub-series that I'm doing, or there'll be Patreon sponsored episodes. Hence why Michael is coming on to talk about Green with Evil. So for the tentpole episodes, I do something that I carried over from my previous podcast life, which is coming up with a research topic to go along with that particular movie. It's usually something historical or cultural because one of the goals I have with the Film Vault is because as much as I've been talking about how entertaining it is, the other half of that, finding entertainment and enlightenment, I'm an academic. And so I did research on something that was part and parcel to the movie because I want to help people to appreciate these films more. And when you're dealing with, like say the original Godzilla, 1954, we as a modern day American audience are doubly separated from that because it's a classic Japanese film. So we're separated by both time and culture. And you can't fully break that down because that movie was originally made for a 1954 Japanese audience. So because we're technically not the intended audience, we can't appreciate it to the same extent that original audience could. But one of the things I want to do with the show is to break down those barriers as much as I can. Now, you can't break them completely. You just can't. But I wanted to break them down as much as I could so that people could look at this and be like, oh, that makes so much more sense now. To use a bit of an example, although this is more to do with Kaiju Ramen, the first article I did for Kaiju Ramen, it was actually something that Travis wisely came and said, hey, I want you to do this for Kaiju Ramen, which was to write about Okinawa and its connections to most specifically, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. And I'm like, oh yeah, because I did that in, like I said, my previous podcast life. So I just recycled my research on that, made it into an article. And it showed that all of these goofy things, with things that we think are goofy in the movie, were actually very culturally significant. Just a few years before that movie was made, the Okinawan Islands, had been returned to Japan by the United States, who had been controlling them since the end of World War II. So the fact that Toho is making a Godzilla film, their flagship franchise, set in Okinawa, because I found out doing research that Okinawa didn't really like the Japanese mainland. So it's like, hey, we like you. You just got added back to the mainland. We're going to make a Godzilla movie for you. Not only will it be in Okinawa, but we're going to make an Okinawan monster with King Caesar, who's a Shisa statue, which is a very Okinawan tradition, cultural thing. So it's almost like this love letter in a way to Okinawa and its culture. When you know that, and some of those weird things that you might just think that's just crazy fantasy stuff, no, it actually has a basis in reality, and it makes the movie even more interesting. So that's the sort of stuff that I do. Usually when I'm trying to pick a toku topic, I try as hard as I can to tailor it as much to the movie as I can. So I'm trying to think of an example. Well, I'll use Gamera 3 because you were on for Gamera 3. So people know about all of the stuff that gets brought up. There's a lot of cultural stuff in Gamera 3. And so there's all this talk about the four guardians from the different cardinal directions, northeast, west, and south. And one of them is a turtle, so they're like, oh, it must be Gamera. And one was I'm trying to remember which one. I think it was a phoenix, and they said, oh, that must be Iris or something like that. And then they offhandedly talk about the other two. So I started looking into stuff like that. It was just like, oh, what's going on with this? And and by doing that, it actually helped to make Gamera 3 make more sense, because admittedly, Gamera 3 is a little esoteric. I love it, but it's a little esoteric. And so that helped to make more sense of the movie for me. And you start to see just how much cultural depth is crammed into this that, again, goes over the heads of a lot of non-Japanese audience members. But even when it's not one of those tentpole episodes, I try to look into stuff that is connected to the movie to make it a little bit more interesting. So we'll talk about Rodan here a little bit. When you came on for Rodan, there was one just offhand line, like throwaway line, that I'm like, okay, I have to look into this because I've heard stuff about this before. And that is when the honeymooning couple gets caught by Rodan, and then the police are investigating that in the next scene. And they're like, oh, maybe it was a suicide. It's like, no, it wasn't a suicide because they only left one shoe. I'm like, oh wait, I have heard stuff about this. I need to look into this. And so me looking into what shoes mean in what connections shoes have to suicide in Japanese culture ended up leading me to this massive essay that goes into like every possible thing, and then right at the end says, and this is what the shoes have to do with suicide in Japanese culture. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
I didn't realize it was this whole to do. I really didn't. And I even got feedback from a listener who, a Japanese listener, who confirmed and expanded on the stuff that I had found. And all he did was just share like a little paragraph that I used to summarize everything. And so it's like, it's just weird stuff like that. I was like, it's just a throwaway line, but I'm like, what is the significance of this? Why is this a thing? Because I don't think it's a thing in American culture. Why is it a thing here? And so, like I said, it took me into some very interesting places.
That's awesome. We have a question from Raf and Shoma. Sorry. Question. Similar to Mechagodzilla 1974, does this late reappreciation explain the obligatory We Love Okinawa episode we see a lot in Japanese media that seems to continue to this day?
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, because, like I said, there's... and I am by no means a historian. I'm just a crazy English major and a raving fanboy. But that would be my understanding, because Okinawa has had a long-standing history of ill will toward the mainland, because several hundred years ago, the mainland basically came in and tried to annex Okinawa, and before that, they were their own kingdom. They were independent, but then the mainlanders just came in and they're like, we're just going to take over. You're now part of Japan. They're like, we don't want to be part of Japan. And then there was when they did annex the islands during the Meiji era, if I remember correctly, they were not kind to the Okinawans. They weren't like rounding them up and shooting them or anything like that, but they were a bit oppressive. They would do things like, if any of the Okinawan kids in school would speak their native language, they would basically make them wear like a sign around their neck that would shame them for doing it and things like that. And so they were not nice to them. And then there was a huge battle fought on Okinawa toward the end of World War II, one of the bloodiest battles in the entire war. And it was horrific. And then the United States controlled the islands from that point on until the early 70s, when they gave them back. But even then, there's been a lot of military bases that have been established on Okinawa. So, there's still vestiges of that there. So the Okinawans have just had this long history of just getting fed up with these outsiders coming in and telling them what to do, which I think explains why, probably what you're talking about. So, because the mainland is like, okay, we know you don't like us, but we like you, and we want you to be part of our national community. So, we like you, So it's like, it's kind of a mea culpa, but I don't want to call it a mea culpa. I want to say it's more like appreciation. Hence why King Caesar is literally a Shisa statue, basically, as a monster. And they need a Shisa statue. The MacGuffin of the movie is a Shisa statue that they need to find to wake him up. So, the aliens build their base in Okinawa. The whole movie set in Okinawa. So it's really fascinating to see all of this.
Yeah, it is very fascinating. All right, so we got one more question from me to wrap up this discussion. So you already have 3 podcasts.
Yeah.
If you were crazy enough to do a 4th podcast,
oh God,
what would it be about?
Oh. The funny thing is I have actually thought about this.
Oh my goodness gracious!
But it's more in a what am I going to do when I'm done with the film vault? Because I've had people ask me, it's like, what are you going to do when you're done with the film vault? And I'm like, that's a really good question. So I've kicked around some ideas. It would have to be, I think it would be one of 2 things. If it was something more like what I'm doing now, where it's like analysis and review, that sort of a thing, if it wasn't that, it would probably end up being an audio drama, because I would probably just go full tilt, make just like a full tilt audio drama podcast, because I'm fascinated by that. Dr. Dorif spinoff. I see you, Danny. I see that right there. But yeah, I'm here with my own podcast. I'm going to talk about my children, the funny things that my children are doing today. There's so much laughter where I am.
Can you hear the laughter?
Do you hear the laughter? The children are so happy today. What have they done today? Did someone eat one of my children? Oh, they did, but now I have an even bigger child here with me.
Oh my God. I can't.
Anyway, yeah, but so either it might just be a like I said, a full bore audio drama, or if it, like I said, was like what I'm doing now, I think I would probably do something like I thought about like doing a podcast where because I had a bad habit of buying books. Like I just see books on sale, and I'm just like, I must have them, and I ended up buying a bunch of books, and I'm like, I'm going to read this. Then 2 shelves of books later, so I'm like, okay, I need to stop buying books because I have to read what I have. So I thought about doing something like that, where it's just like I randomly grab one of the books that are sitting on my shelf waiting to be read, and do it as kind of like a book club where I talk about the book, and so like I pulled this off the shelf and I read it, and this is how I feel about this particular book, or something like that. I've also thought about doing something comic book and superhero related, because I love comics and superheroes. Hence, why doing these spin-off podcasts about henshin heroes is kind of perfect for me, because it's the best of both worlds. I get kaiju and I get superheroes. So I thought about doing something like that. But what it would be, since I know that as much as I hate to say this, more people see the movies than read the comics, I thought about doing a show where I pick a superhero film, and then I find out what comics were either the basis or the inspiration for that film, and then I read the comics, and then basically do a show where I do a big comparison between the two of them. How the movie is different, how the movie's similar. Does the movie improve on the comic, or is the comic better? Spoiler warning, the comics are usually better. But anyway, so do something that was kind of like that. But like I said, these are more just like fledgling ideas. I'm too focused on the ones that I have now to develop those all that much further than just kind of these initial concepts, because as much as I might make it sound like I have like boundless energy and I can do 10 things at once, that's a little bit of a misnomer. I don't have unlimited energy. I do have to sleep sometimes, and so I can only do so much, and I have to remind myself I can only do so much. So those are ideas that will probably have to be saved for later, preferably when I have a little bit less on my podcast plate.
Yeah, your podcast plate is pretty full.
Yeah, and that's just the podcast plate. Don't get me started on all the the 100 other things that I do. Writing, and I'm a ballroom dancer. I work and I teach, and just there's just so much.
When do you sleep?
I've never. I'm like Nightman, this obscure superhero from the 90s, who one of his superpowers was he didn't have to sleep.
Oh man, so I guess we're gonna have to wrap up this live stream so you can go take a nap. So
Mama Kim said so.
Yes, it's time for your bedtime. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for coming on to my show. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
It's always a pleasure to be on here. It's always a pleasure to have you on. In fact, I didn't get into a whole lot of detail about that. You get to do a little bit of voice acting for me in the next episode.
Yeah,
this
very
week.
Excited.
You do a little cameo at the end of the episode, so be on the lookout for that. listeners, viewers, when that comes out. And we've been talking about having you come back to play some other characters.
Indeed.
Yeah, including one who might end up being a regular. So,
Oh.
yes.
Yes.
Helping people realize their acting dreams on the Film Vault.
Hooray! The Kaiju Queen has spoken. All right. To you guys watching at home, Nathan has to go to bed now. So thank you for taking time out of your day and hanging out with me and my fantastic guest. You can listen to all 3 of Nathan's podcasts by following the links down below in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Like this stream if you had a good time here tonight. And be sure to be here next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for another edition of Chill with Kaiju Kim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.